This episode is the last episode of the quarter, and that means it's time for a Q&A. I have actually quite a considerable collection of questions that I've received from you, and I think I'm going to end up splitting it into 2 different episodes. But before I get into the first question, I want to start by reading a review. This was left on Apple Podcast, iTunes. I came across this podcast after my wife and I had a rough patch, and I knew we had to do better. It has been so helpful for us to listen together. We have those, quote, aha moments where we look at each other and smile and point. We get a good conversation going from these podcasts. Keep up the good work. I so appreciate that review and the 113 ratings I have on Apple Podcasts. There are ratings on all the different platforms, but the ones that I specifically am mentioning right now are on Apple. And I thank you so much for writing that review. And most of all, I'm just so happy that the things that I share and the guests that I interview, the topics that I cover have served you and your wife. So thank you for that. And if you are new to the podcast, a warm welcome. And if you're a recurrent listener, you've listened to a few episodes, you listened to all of them, I really want to invite you to leave a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because it really does make a difference to tell people what they can find. I currently have 113 ratings on Apple Podcast, and I am grateful for every single one of them. So give me some more. That would be wonderful. All right, going into the questions for today's episode, I picked 2 that are kind of opposite in nature. So we're going to cover a whole spectrum of desire and libido issues. Both of these questions are from women married to men. So here's the first one. How do I match my husband's sexual desires? He seems to always be readily available for sex and wants me to reciprocate, but I can honestly go on months without physical intimacy. First of all, I so appreciate the question. This is definitely not everyone's situation, but it really is very common. And I want to just zoom back out and look at a whole bunch of things. First of all, I'll start with the emotional connection. The fact is that in a long-lasting committed relationship, in order for a woman to feel sexually alive, sexually attracted, there has to be emotional intimacy. Now, I don't know anything about this marriage, and I'm going to give many different answers and think that both for the person who asked and any of you listening who have this situation, think of this as a buffet. So just pick the part that's relevant for you and implement it so that you can have more sensual, sexual fulfillment with your partner. Okay, so the first thing is that emotional intimacy is essential. And you might have a good marriage where you feel good talking to one another. But if you're kind of closed to sexual intimacy, then I invite you to deepen the emotional intimacy. What would be more vulnerable for you to share with your spouse? What would you like to hear from him, which is more vulnerable? I don't really think we fully understand the mechanism of action at all, but there is something that happens when you open up your soul and you feel seen, held, met, cherished, respected, that when that is happening in your soul, well, then you're available and interested for that to happen in your body too. Because when it comes to long-term relationships where you're living together, you have a daily life that overlaps with one another, really everything functions as foreplay in the sense that it either brings you closer together or drives you further apart. So if you're not feeling closer, if you're not feeling self-expressed and cherished and in the present moment, then that's what you need more of in order to really open and be available for more sexual intimacy as well. Another thing is that I happen to know that the person who sent this question is a physician, and what I'm about to say is true for most people, and it's acutely true for most physicians, which is that we are basically in a state of getting things done, making things happen, a kind of vigilant, sometimes hypervigilant state of just noticing everything that needs to happen and making sure that we do it. Even if it's pleasant and enjoyable, we are very aware of all of the things that need to be done, which is fundamentally a more stressful state. And desire lives where there isn't stress. Desire lives when you're relaxed and at peace and available for juicy, non-survival activities and attitudes. So again, if what I've shared with the original question, you're a woman whose desire is much lower than your husband's, I encourage you to notice how often do you feel genuinely relaxed in the day. And if the answer is not that often, then do any of these things that appeal to you. Get a massage once a week, take warm baths, listen to erotica, spend time taking a walk in nature, do whatever it is that has you feel really at home and enjoying your body. Feeling relaxed and at home in your body is essential for cultivating all the juicy, sensual, delicious intimacy when you're in a long-term relationship. So that's one thing. Another thing is, if you're the husband in this equation, how can you show up in a way that is more honoring and more attuned to your woman? That might well mean romantic gestures, bringing flowers and so forth. It may mean being more curious, being more present, being a better listener. When your woman shares with you, instead of problem solving right away and going into action mode, you find the courage to just be present with what her actual feelings are, accepting them and being with them, which can feel terrifying, but it is absolutely influential in cultivating the emotional intimacy between the two of you, which then paves the way for sensual intimacy and sexual intimacy. So what I'm wanting to convey is that building an internal experience where you feel sensually alive, where you experience pleasure every day, where you can be relaxed and follow your body's desires and intuition, and you have emotional connection, which includes not just, there's this crazy, but not so crazy because it's real statistic that couples with young children rarely spend more than 4 minutes a day talking about anything other than kids and logistics. You need to carve out room to feel like a woman interacting with your man without any rush, without any agenda, without any idea that it's going to lead to taking off your clothes and having sex. Just being with one another as an alive person in the role of woman rather than in the role of doctor or other professional or caregiver or parent. Just to feel like a woman is essential to having more desire naturally arise. In addition, so I've talked about an emotional component, more of like a sensual component, feeling good and alive in your body. And then the other thing is that if the sex that you're having isn't the kind of sex you would want more of, then you are not going to want more of it. Very often we think, what's wrong with me that I don't have more desire? Well, if there's some food that doesn't taste good, you don't enjoy eating it, why would you want more of it? So this is something to consider. Have you ever had sex that you absolutely would want more the next day or a few hours later if there's time and you're not worn out? If not, how can you create that? How to create that, I want to be very clear. The responsibility is on you, the woman wanting to have those experiences, to discover how they could be available. How do you need to feel? How do you want to be touched? And conveying that with grace to your spouse. And if you are the man always available for sex, wanting your woman to be more responsive, it would behoove you to learn how to initiate so that she just melts and her breathing quickens and it's more appealing than anything else happening. How do you not just initiate, but actually, like invite it? How do you actually start touching her? How do clothes come off? What do you say? Where do you touch? How slowly do you touch? There are so many skills to develop, both for a woman with self-awareness and exploring what brings her pleasure, and for a man in learning to be exceedingly more attuned. So without having anything other than the original question, which I'm just going to read again, how do I match my husband's sexual desires? He seems to always be readily available for sex and wants me to reciprocate, but I can honestly go on months without physical intimacy. This is such an important question. I just want to summarize what I've shared, which is focusing on emotional intimacy without any attachment to having more sex or more desire often leads straight there. Paying attention to sensual intimacy or sensual pleasure, sensual experiences that you have with yourself that opens you up to more pleasure with your husband. And then discovering what kind of sexual experiences would make you wanting more and more and more. And similarly, if you're a husband listening and this describes your wife's circumstances, how can you be responsive and attuned and courageous in your own vulnerability to contribute to creating this? I also definitely want to say that the Aligned in Hot Marriage program absolutely is an answer to this question, because it's not about sex and it's not explicitly about desire. But over and over, when couples go through this program, which you can do on your own, it's an independent study. You can do it whatever pace you like. Often couples will do it once a week, almost like having a date night together, but you could do one a month, whatever suits you. The Aligned in Hot Marriage program gives you context. I do educational videos and tell stories about couples who've navigated these kinds of challenges. Absolutely. And also give you fun activities to do with one another, questions to ask, like benign questions, fun questions. The whole thing is paced in such a way that it's not going to be, it gets deeper and deeper, but it starts in a way that wouldn't intimidate anyone. Couples who tend to be resistant to really focusing on this area of their relationship find once they do it that it's actually a lot more fun than they anticipated. It's not weird or awkward. Like, it's really heart opening. And invariably, once there's more emotional closeness, it has a lubricating effect. Let me just say that in fact, I've recorded a few podcasts with couples who went through the Aligned in Hot Marriage program, and every one of them described, like, our sex life was good. I mean, it doesn't need to be to do the program, but that happens to be the case for the people that I've interviewed. Their sex life was good, but it got so much better as a result of doing the Aligned in Hot Marriage program. And there are a few who weren't really having sex and went through the Aligned in Hot Marriage program and started having sex again, because it just shows you how to be with one another in a way that just no one really has been taught, and it's rarely modeled. So if this question resonates in your relationship, please try all of the things that I've shared as my response. And if it's a high priority, enroll in the Aligned in Hot Marriage program, which will give you step-by-step guidance in how to create a really rich and mutually satisfying with respect to quality and frequency in your sexual intimacy as well. Not because I talk about sex, but because I provide you with guidance for all of the other things that make that the natural next step to take together. So I will put in the show notes the link to the Aligned and Hot Marriage program if this is something that interests you. I really think you're going to be very happy to go through the curriculum. And if what I've shared already is enough for you, go for it. Go for it, because so much more is possible. All right, and with that, I'm going to switch to a very different question. I'm going to read the whole thing and then just boil down to what the question is in terms of the part I'm going to answer. Let me say this is also from a woman. My husband works from 5 a.m. until 4 p.m. in the afternoon and is often in bed by 9:30. That's okay, but it means we don't get to be intimate as often as we would like. And I still have a 27-year-old daughter at home, and her bedroom is right next to ours. I'm a bit uncomfortable with her knowing we are having sex, so tend to leave it until Saturday or Sunday mornings when she sleeps in. So I like this question because I definitely receive a lot of questions from people wondering how to navigate sex with children at home when the children are, I don't know, babies and sleeping in the same room, or 3-year-olds, 10-year-olds next door, but 27. It's just as true. This is true no matter what age your children are. Okay, that's one part of the question, is navigating sex with someone, a child in the adjacent room. The other part comes next. My husband is okay with just having sex on Saturday and Sunday mornings when the daughter sleeps in, but I'm not. My libido is fairly high, so I often reach for a toy, mostly clitoral stimulation, when everyone else is asleep. The problem I have is that I seem to have an issue orgasming without my trusty mate, even when my husband and I have sex. That is, he used to use his hand when we had sex to clitorally stimulate me, but it doesn't seem to work anymore. And I think it's because I'm so used to the toy. He's okay with it, so he says, but I would like to be able to have an orgasm with him without the toy, because sometimes I get the feeling he feels inadequate. Although I've asked, he's not very open with his feelings, so I worry about it. Any suggestions? I'm perimenopause if that makes a difference, but I don't think so, because orgasms and sex are better than ever as I age. So I love that she shared that part, that orgasms and sex are better than ever as she ages, because we need more women sharing that reality so that we don't get stuck thinking it's not true. It's not true for everyone, but maybe it will be true for you, or has been true for you. Anyway, back to the two questions, really. I want to address having sex with a child in the adjacent room. First of all, if your child is 27, if your child is over the age of 18, actually, whatever age it is going to vary with the family. But certainly, if a child is 27, you can be very direct and say some version of, we're really glad you're living at home, assuming that's true. You can find another way to say it if it's not. That's kind and gracious and positive. We are glad to have you here, whatever it is. And you're old enough to know that we need to have intimate time together. So you can work out a schedule that maybe, I'm not going to get too logistical here, and especially with your husband's working hours, but if he finishes work at 4 p.m. and goes to bed at 9:30 p.m., that's a lot of time in there. So maybe on Mondays and Thursdays, your daughter doesn't come home. She makes sure she's out of the house between 5 and 7. Like, there are ways that you can coordinate it. It doesn't need to be super awkward. You don't even need to tell her, whether you had sex or you didn't have sex. You don't even need to make it about sex. You can just say, your dad and I need some private time, and make it work. She could go to the library. She could, I don't know what. It depends on the personalities, what her interests are. But I highly recommend that you do not feel hostage to having your daughter in the house. Your sex life should not be hostage to your daughter at 27. It's one thing for your sex life to be hostage to your child when your child is 3 weeks old, but not at 27. That's not sustainable. So I really want to encourage you, if you feel held back by other adults in the house. It could be in-laws for this matter, or you have a cousin staying. It doesn't matter what the actual relationship is. If you have an adult who is nearby and it is interfering with the intimacy that you share with your spouse, I encourage you to handle that. There is no reason not to, other than awkwardness, shame, societal conditioning, embarrassment. So, of course, those are big. I said that sort of tongue in cheek. Those are big enough things that would hold somebody back. But I'm encouraging you to find the way to navigate that in a way that doesn't actually even need to be that personal. You don't need to say, we want to have sex. You don't need to say, Dad's okay with it, but I'm not. No, just say that you need more private time with your husband and work it out that way. And if your daughter's 27 and she has a partner, maybe you agree to be out of the house, certain hours so she has room to do what she wants to do in her room. Anyway, I think you get the point with that. Mostly, you don't have to just accept that with an adult child that it's going to hamper your connection with your husband and your pleasure and gratification. It does not need to be that way, even though that would be typical. Okay, the second part of this question is about orgasming without a toy. So this is actually a very profound question, and I think we tend to kind of think of sex as kind of having a life of its own, but really our genitals in some very important ways function like the rest of our bodies. There are nerves, there's blood supply, and we can, the wisdom of Pavlov, where he did the experiment where he rang the bell and fed the dog food, and so the dog would salivate in anticipation of eating, and then got to where he would ring the bell and the dog would salivate even when the food wasn't there. That's not like a complete analogy for this situation, but I just want to say that we can train lots of aspects of ourselves, including our genitals, to be responsive to certain things. And then when those things are absent, the response is altered. So there's something else, though, in how this question was asked. It sounds like you're fine not orgasming without a toy. You're just concerned about your husband's ego. Okay, well, let me just say, your husband's ego doesn't need to motivate you. If you're actually okay only orgasming with a toy, then so be it. You can still have lots of pleasure and lots of fun together. And you can use a toy during your lovemaking with one another. But if it matters to you, not just for your husband's ego, but it's something you want to tap back into, then I highly recommend you make your sex, particularly when it comes to clitoral stimulation, slower, more attuned, more sensually rich. So if with a vibrator or your husband's way of stimulating your clitoris, it's a lot of fast activity, then we can get kind of numb to slower, much richer sensations. So my suggestion is that you ask your husband to touch you with incredible, slow and gentle and building ever so slowly movements so that you become awake, and your clitoris is awake and turned on and responsive. And so rather than more of a quickie clitoral orgasm, you have molten, simmering, more and more and more until it boils kind of experience, as a way to, first of all, enjoy yourselves, and second of all, kind of resensitize your clitoral responsiveness. So this is going to need to be something that you play with. You might use lube or some kind of oil and have relaxing but fun music, whatever that is for you, and really just focus on more of a mindful approach for both of you. And in the process, you want to focus on how your body feels and how the connection between the two of you feels. And when you really can enjoy looking in one another's eyes or just feeling the love flowing between the two of you, that will definitely awaken your clitoris and give you different flavors of orgasm that using a toy won't do. You can have really great experiences with a toy, but not the kind of whole soul communion that happens between you and your husband when you both are very intentional about creating that. Now, I know that some of you are going to be like, oh, yeah, let's do that. That's amazing. And others of you are going to be like, what is, like, how do we do that? Like, what is she even talking about? So, if you're in the former, go for it, in the former group of people. And if you're in the latter, I want you to know you are not alone and just breathing, paying attention to breathing deeply, both for you, the woman getting her clitoris stroked, and for you, the man who is touching that clitoris. Just start by breathing more deeply and bringing your attention to your sensations. Almost like a meditation, but you're really bringing your attention to your genitals. And if you do that, things will start to open for you. So, thank you to both of the women who asked these questions, one about having much less desire than her husband, one about having so much more desire than her husband. And I assume that in answering these two questions, if you're interested in the Intimate Marriage podcast, there's something here that spoke to you. So please take what you've heard, be inspired, and enjoy yourselves. And if you want some guidance in doing that, the Aligned and Hot Marriage program is definitely calling your name. So again, the link will be in the show notes. And I have more questions. So I'm going to do another episode next week where I go through the others. And if you in the meantime are listening and you have questions, you can absolutely send them to me. I'll put the link in the show notes for that too, but you can just go to the contact page on my website and send me questions, or you can find me on social media, or if you're on my email list, you can email me, however you want to do it. Send me questions and I'll be sure to answer them the next time I record a Q&A episode.